Montana Territory, 1875. The silhouette of a lone rider appeared against the fiery sunset, the vast emptiness of the frontier stretching before him like an endless sea. Finn McAllister pulled his hat lower against the dying light, his shadow long and solitary across the prairie grass. At 26, he'd already lived more lifetimes than most men twice his age, and the weight of those years settled in his eyes, belying his youthful face. The small town of Whispering Pines appeared on the horizon, little more than a collection of wooden structures clinging stubbornly to existence in the untamed wilderness. Finn had called this place home for 3 years now, though home was a generous word for what amounted to a bunkhouse on the Double R Ranch and the occasional room above the saloon when work took him to town. Home is where you hang your hat, his father used to say before a Comanche arrow found his heart. Finn had been 14 then, learning that in the West, attachments were dangerous things, liabilities that left you vulnerable. Better to ride alone, trust no one but your horse and your gun. The frontier was no place for softness or sentiment. It had been a hard lesson, but one that had kept him alive. The muscles in his jaw worked as he guided his chestnut mare toward the ranch. His handsome features, a straight nose, firm jaw, and eyes the color of summer sage, remained impassive, betraying nothing of the thoughts swirling beneath his weathered hat. At the ranch, he'd find work, food, and a bunk, everything a man needed to survive. And survival was enough, he'd convinced himself. Had to be. McAllister, Randall Thornton, the ranch owner, called out as Finn dismounted in the yard. "Need you to head into town tomorrow. Supply train's coming in." "Yes, sir," Finn replied, his voice carrying the slight drawl he'd picked up from years on the trail. He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "And McAllister," Thornton added, his weathered face creasing into what might have been concern, "you might consider staying in town for the social. Wouldn't kill you to talk to folks who ain't horses or cowboys." Finn offered a noncommittal nod. Socials meant people. People meant complications, and complications were luxuries a man like him couldn't afford. The frontier didn't forgive those who dropped their guard. That night, as he sat alone by the bunkhouse fire, long after the other hands had turned in, he stared into the flames and wondered, briefly, what it might be like to have something more than just survival. The thought slipped away as quickly as it had come. Dreams were dangerous things in a land that took more than it gave. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that hinted at the harsh winter to come. Finn rode into Whispering Pines, his lean frame straight in the saddle. At 6 feet tall with broad shoulders from years of ranch work, he cut an imposing figure despite his youth. The stubble on his jaw was still light, a day or two old at most. The main street buzzed with unusual activity. Children darted between wagons, and women gathered in clusters, their voices animated. Supply trains always brought excitement, but this was different. "Homesteaders," explained Jed, the general store owner, when Finn inquired. "3 families on the train. One of 'em's a widow woman with 2 young aunts. Folks are saying she bought the old Miller place." Something unnamed tightened in Finn's chest. The Miller place was just north of the Double R, prime land with a creek running through it. But the cabin had stood empty since old Miller passed 2 winters ago. "Widow?" he asked, the word feeling strange on his tongue. "Name's Virginia Pierce. Pretty little thing. Can't be more than 22 or 23. Shame about her husband. Heard it was typhoid back east." Finn merely nodded, mentally cataloging this new information. New settlers meant change, and change rarely boded well in his experience. Still, it wasn't his concern. He had supplies to collect and a job to do. He was loading the last of the flour sacks when the commotion started. A wagon had overturned near the edge of town, its wheel caught in a rut. The shouts reached him before he saw it, a woman's voice, high with fear, calling for help. Without thinking, Finn was running, his long strides eating the distance between the store and the accident. The wagon lay on its side, goods scattered across the dirt. A young woman stood nearby, her arms wrapped protectively around 2 small children. "My horses," she was saying to a gathering crowd. "Please, someone help my horses." The team was tangled in their harnesses, panicked and at risk of injury. Finn moved forward with the calm certainty of someone who'd handled spooked animals all his life. "Easy now," he murmured, approaching slowly, hands visible. The larger horse, a bay gelding, rolled its eyes but settled at his touch. It took 10 minutes of careful work to free the animals, and another 20 to right the wagon with help from other men. Only when the crisis had passed did Finn finally turn his attention to the woman. She stood watching him, gratitude shining in eyes the color of warm honey. Her face was heart-shaped, framed by thick, chestnut hair that had partially escaped its pins during the excitement. She couldn't have been more than 23, yet there was a strength in her posture that spoke of someone who had weathered storms. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now, tinged with an accent that wasn't from these parts. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Finn touched the brim of his hat awkwardly. "Just helping, ma'am." "Virginia Pierce," she offered, extending a gloved hand. "These are my children, Emma and James." The girl couldn't have been more than 6, with her mother's chestnut hair and solemn eyes. The boy was younger, perhaps 4, clutching his mother's skirts and regarding Finn with open curiosity. "Finn McAllister," he replied, taking her hand briefly. The contact sent an unfamiliar jolt through him. "I work at the Double R." "The Double R?" Her face brightened with recognition. "Mr. Thornton's ranch? I believe we're to be neighbors then. We've purchased the property to the north. The Miller place." Just as Jed had said. Something about this woman, the quiet determination in her eyes, the protective way she held her children, made Finn uneasy. Not because she seemed dangerous, but because she seemed important, like someone who could matter. "It's rough country for a woman alone," he found himself saying, immediately regretting the words. Rather than take offense, Virginia's chin lifted slightly. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. McAllister. And I'm not alone." She glanced down at her children. "We've come too far to turn back now." There was something in her voice, a steel beneath the gentility, that caught him off guard. This was no helpless city woman playing at frontier life. There was a story here, one that had forged something unyielding in her delicate features. "Well," he said, tipping his hat again. "Good luck to you, Mrs. Pierce." As he turned to go, she called after him. "The town is having a welcome dinner tonight at the church. Will you be there, Mr. McAllister?" He should say no, should make his excuses and retreat to the solitude of the bunkhouse. Instead, he heard himself say, "Perhaps, ma'am," and walked away feeling as though something fundamental had shifted in his world. The church was packed that evening. Every family from miles around gathered to welcome the newcomers. Finn stood at the back, uncomfortable in his best shirt, wondering what madness had possessed him to come. He'd washed and shaved for the occasion, his jaw smooth for the first time in days, and he felt strangely exposed. Virginia Pierce sat at one of the tables, her children beside her. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes, her hair neatly arranged in a twist at the nape of her neck. She listened attentively as townspeople introduced themselves, but her gaze occasionally drifted to the door, as if searching. When she spotted Finn, a smile touched her lips, and she raised a hand in greeting. That same strange tightness returned to his chest. Before he could acknowledge her, Pastor Miller was calling for everyone's attention. "Let us welcome our new neighbors," the pastor announced. "The Edwards family, the Davisons, and Mrs. Virginia Pierce with her children, Emma and James. Mrs. Pierce will be taking over the old Miller homestead." There was polite applause, and then the pastor continued. "Mrs. Pierce has come to us from Philadelphia after the sad loss of her husband. She brings with her not only her children, but considerable skill as a seamstress and midwife, talents our growing community sorely needs." Finn watched as Virginia stood briefly, thanking everyone for their kindness with a grace that seemed to illuminate the simple church hall. Her words were few but sincere, and even from across the room, he could see the sheen of tears she blinked back when she spoke of making a new home. Later, as plates were passed and conversations flowed, Finn found himself approached by young James, who had apparently slipped away from his mother's side. "Are you a real cowboy?" the boy asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Despite himself, Finn smiled. "I suppose I am. Do you fight Indians and outlaws?" Finn crouched down to the boy's level. "Most days I just tend cattle and fix fences. Not nearly as exciting." "James," Virginia appeared, flustered. "I'm so sorry, Mr. McAllister. He's fascinated by cowboys." "No harm done, ma'am." Finn stood, suddenly aware of how close she was, the faint scent of lavender surrounding her. "I'm glad you came," she said softly. "I wanted to thank you properly for your help today. Wasn't much. It was everything to us. Her gaze was direct, unflinching. We don't know many people here yet. It's comforting to see a familiar face, even one I've only just met. Something in her words pierced through Finn's carefully constructed defenses. The idea that his presence could provide comfort was foreign, unsettling. He'd spent so long believing his purpose was simply to endure the frontier, not to ease its burdens for others. "When do you move to your property?" he heard himself ask. "Tomorrow. Mr. Thornton has kindly offered to send some of his men to help us settle in." "I'll be there," Finn said, the words out before he could consider them. Virginia's smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "Thank you, Mr. McAllister." As she turned to rejoin her children, Finn was struck by the peculiar sensation that he'd just made a promise that went beyond helping a neighbor move into a homestead. He'd opened a door he'd long kept shut, and he wasn't entirely sure he could close it again. The Miller place looked different with Virginia Pierce standing on its porch. What had been an empty shell, a reminder of frontier hardship, now hummed with potential. Children's laughter echoed from inside as Finn and two other hands from the double-R unloaded the last of the furniture from the wagons. "That's the last of it, Mrs. Pierce," Finn said, setting down a trunk in what would become her bedroom. Virginia pushed a strand of hair from her flushed face. She'd been working alongside them all day, directing, organizing, transforming the dusty cabin into something that might eventually resemble a home. "Please, call me Virginia," she said. "And I can't thank you enough. All of you." She included the other ranch hands in her gratitude, but her eyes lingered on Finn. The other men soon departed, but Finn found reasons to stay. A loose board on the porch that needed fixing, a well that required inspection. As the afternoon stretched into evening, he realized he was delaying the inevitable return to his solitary existence. "You must be hungry," Virginia said as he finished securing the chicken coop. "We don't have much, but I've made stew. Would you join us?" The sensible answer was no. The path of self-preservation dictated a polite refusal and a quick retreat. Instead, Finn found himself seated at her table, watching as she served her children first, then him, her movements efficient but graceful. "It's not much," she apologized, "but it's hot." "It's more than I'd have at the bunkhouse," he assured her. The stew was simple but flavorful, better than anything he'd eaten in longer than he could remember. As they ate, James peppered him with questions about ranch life, while Emma watched him with solemn eyes that seemed to see more than a child should. Virginia gently redirected her son when his enthusiasm threatened to overwhelm their guest, but Finn found he didn't mind the boy's curiosity. "How did you come to choose Whispering Pines?" Finn asked when there was a lull in the conversation. Virginia's expression grew pensive. "After my husband died, there wasn't much left for us in Philadelphia. His medical practice had debts I hadn't known about." She glanced at her children, lowering her voice. "We were facing difficulties. Then I saw an advertisement for land out here. Affordable land. A chance to start fresh where no one knew us or our circumstances." "It's not an easy life," Finn said quietly. "No life worth living comes easy, Mr. McAllister." "Finn," he corrected. "If I'm to call you Virginia." She smiled, and something warm unfurled in his chest. "Finn, then." After dinner, as the children were put to bed in their new room, Finn found himself standing on the porch with Virginia, the vast canopy of stars stretching above them. "Are you afraid?" he asked suddenly. "Out here, alone with your children?" She considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But fear serves no purpose unless it keeps you alert to danger. I cannot afford to be ruled by it." "You're brave." Virginia laughed softly. "Not brave. Determined. There's a difference." She turned to face him, her expression earnest in the lamplight spilling from the window. "May I ask you something, Finn?" He nodded, wary. "Why did you help us today? You don't seem like a man who involves himself in others' affairs easily." The question caught him off guard with its perception. "I don't rightly know," he answered honestly. Seemed like the thing to do. She studied him, as if trying to read something written in his features. "Well, whatever your reasons, I'm grateful. It's good to know we have at least one friend in this new place." "Friend." The words settled uncomfortably on his shoulders. Friends were entanglements, complications. And yet, as he bid her good night and mounted his horse for the ride back to the ranch, Finn couldn't deny the strange lightness in his chest, as if something long calcified had begun to crack and shift. Over the next few weeks, Finn found himself riding past the Pierce homestead with increasing frequency. There was always some reason: a stray calf to report, news from town to deliver, a tool to lend. Virginia never questioned these visits, always welcoming him with the same warm smile that had begun to feature in his thoughts at odd moments throughout the day. Mr. Finn, James would call, running to meet him whenever he appeared. Even Emma had warmed to him, sometimes showing him her drawings or the flowers she'd collected. It was during one such visit, as October painted the landscape in russet and gold, that Finn arrived to find Virginia struggling with her plow horse, which had gone lame. "What happened?" he asked, dismounting quickly. "I'm not sure," she said, her face tight with worry. "He was fine this morning, but now." She gestured to where the horse stood, favoring its right foreleg. Finn examined the animal carefully. "Stone bruise, I think. He'll recover, but he needs rest. At least a week, maybe more." Virginia's expression fell. "A week? But the field. I need to have it turned before winter. The seed." The worry in her voice tugged at something deep in Finn's chest. Without the horse, she couldn't prepare her field for spring planting. Without planting, there would be no crop next year. Without a crop, "I'll do it," he said. Virginia stared at him. "What?" "I'll plow your field. I can come mornings before my shift at the ranch and evenings after." "Finn, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He met her gaze steadily. "Neighbors help neighbors out here. It's how we survive." The gratitude in her eyes was almost too much to bear. For a moment, he thought she might embrace him, and something both hopeful and terrified fluttered in his stomach at the prospect. Instead, she simply touched his arm briefly. "Thank you," she said softly. "We'll pay you, of course, when we can." "No." The word came out more forcefully than he'd intended. "No payment. Just, maybe supper, when I'm working late." She smiled then, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. "That seems more than fair." True to his word, Finn arrived before dawn the next morning. For a week, he worked Virginia's field in the early light, rode to the Double R for his regular duties, then returned to finish more acres as the sun set. It was exhausting work on top of his regular responsibilities, but something about the purpose behind it, protecting Virginia and her children, gave him a strange satisfaction. During these evening sessions, Virginia would bring him water or coffee, sometimes sitting on a nearby stump to talk as he worked. They spoke of simple things at first: the weather, the town, ranch business. Gradually, their conversations deepened. "How did you come to the Double R?" she asked one evening, as the first stars appeared overhead. Finn wiped sweat from his brow, considering his answer. "Been drifting since I was 14. Parents died, and there wasn't much reason to stay put. Worked ranches from Texas to Wyoming before settling here 3 years back." "That's a long time to drift," she observed quietly. He shrugged. "Frontier's no place for putting down roots. Things change too fast. People leave, or die, or break your heart," she suggested gently. Finn's hands stilled on the plow handles. "Something like that. Is that why you keep everyone at arm's length? I've noticed you don't attend church socials or town gatherings unless forced." Her perception unsettled him. "Don't see the point in getting attached. Just makes it harder when things fall apart. And out here, things always fall apart eventually." Virginia was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful in the fading light. "My husband believed that too," she finally said. "That's why he never told me about his debts or his illness until it was too late. He thought he was protecting me by keeping me separate from his troubles." Her voice grew soft. "But all he did was leave me unprepared for the storm when it came." The parallel struck too close to Finn's philosophy for comfort. "It's different," he argued. "I'm not responsible for anyone but myself." "Aren't you?" Her gaze was direct, challenging. "You've been here every day, helping us prepare for winter. That seems like taking responsibility to me." Before he could formulate a response, James came running from the house, calling that supper was ready. The moment passed, but Virginia's words lingered, echoing in Finn's mind long after he'd ridden back to the bunkhouse that night. November brought the first snowfall, gentle flurries that dusted the landscape like sugar. Finn had finished Virginia's field weeks ago, but still found reasons to visit the homestead. He'd repaired her roof, reinforced the barn, and chopped enough firewood to last through January. "You're spending an awful lot of time at the widow's place," Tom Jenkins, another ranch hand, remarked one evening. "Just being neighborly," Finn replied, his tone warning against further comment. Neighborly, is it? Tom grinned. That why you're wearing your good shirt to ride over there today? Finn felt heat rise in his face, but said nothing. It was true he'd taken more care with his appearance lately, even purchasing a new shirt in town. He told himself it was simple respect. Virginia always presented herself neatly, despite her limited means. It seemed only right to do the same. The truth, which he barely acknowledged even to himself, was that something had changed. The smiles he reserved for Virginia and her children came more easily now. The comfort he found in their small cabin, with its homemade curtains and carefully mended furniture, had begun to feel more natural than the Spartan existence he'd cultivated for years. That evening, he arrived at the Pierce homestead to find Virginia sitting on the porch despite the cold, her expression troubled. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, dismounting. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing serious. Just a letter from back east. The children are inside. Would you mind keeping an eye on them for a moment? I need a few minutes." Without waiting for his response, she walked toward the small grove of trees behind the house, her shoulders tight with some unspoken burden. Finn hesitated only briefly before following her. He found her standing with her back against a tree, tears streaming silently down her face. "Virginia," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She quickly wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for you to see this. What happened?" For a moment, he thought she might deflect the question, but then her composure crumbled. "My husband's creditors have found me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're demanding payment. Money I don't have, not until next year's harvest at the earliest." The fragility in her voice stirred something protective in Finn's chest. "How much do they want?" She named a sum that made his breath catch. It was a fortune by frontier standards, more than most settlers would see in years. "I thought coming west would mean starting fresh," she continued, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "I should have known better. The past always finds you, doesn't it?" The resignation in her voice cut through Finn's careful detachment. Without thinking, he reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture surprised them both, and for a moment, they stood frozen, his hand against her face. "I'll help," he heard himself say. "I have savings. Not enough, but some. We can talk to Thornton, maybe get an advance on your crop." "Finn, no." Virginia stepped back, breaking the contact. "I won't drag you into my problems. That's exactly what I was trying to escape by coming here, depending on others, being a burden." "You're not a burden," he said, the words emerging with unexpected force. "You're—" What was she? A neighbor? A friend? Something more complicated that he wasn't ready to name? "You're not alone," he finished simply. "Not anymore." Something shifted in her expression then, a softening around her eyes that made his heart stumble in its rhythm. For a breathless moment, he thought she might step closer, that they might cross some invisible boundary that had been eroding between them for weeks. Instead, Emma's voice called from the house, breaking the spell. "Mama, are you out here?" Virginia straightened, composing herself with visible effort. "We should go back," she said softly. "The children will worry." As they walked side by side toward the warm light of the cabin, Finn was acutely aware that something fundamental had changed. The careful distance he'd maintained all these years had narrowed without his permission, and the terrifying truth was that he wasn't sure he wanted to widen it again. December transformed the territory into a crystalline landscape of white and silver. Christmas approached, bringing with it an air of anticipation that even Finn, with his solitary habits, couldn't entirely ignore. Virginia and her children had been invited to celebrate at the ranch owner's house, a gesture of community spirit that showed how quickly they'd been accepted into the tight-knit frontier society. "You'll be there, won't you, Finn?" Virginia asked when he delivered the invitation. "Emma and James would be disappointed if you weren't." "Just the children?" he found himself asking, a boldness he hardly recognized creeping into his voice. A blush touched her cheeks, visible even in the winter light. "I would miss your company as well, of course." The admission, small as it was, warmed him more than any fire could. "Then I'll be there." In the days leading up to Christmas, Finn found himself facing an unfamiliar dilemma: gifts. He'd never bothered with such sentimentality before, but the thought of Virginia and her children celebrating without some token from him seemed wrong somehow. After much deliberation, He rode to the next town over, where the larger general store offered more selection. For James, he found a small carved wooden horse, painted to match Finn's own chestnut mare. For Emma, a journal with a leather cover, recognizing the quiet thoughtfulness that reminded him sometimes of himself at that age. For Virginia, the choice was harder. Nothing seemed adequate to express what she had come to mean to him. This woman who had somehow slipped past his defenses with her quiet strength and unwavering kindness. Finally, he settled on a silver pendant, simple but elegant, in the shape of a small heart. It was an extravagance he could barely afford, but when the shopkeeper placed it in a small velvet pouch, Finn felt a certainty that transcended practical considerations. Christmas Eve arrived with a gentle snowfall that blanketed the world in hushed white. The Thornton house blazed with light and warmth as Finn approached, suddenly self-conscious in his best clothes, the gifts carefully wrapped in brown paper and string. Virginia and her children were already there, seated near the fire. She wore a dress he hadn't seen before, deep green that brought out the gold in her hair and eyes. When she spotted him, her face brightened in a way that sent his heart racing. "Finn, we were beginning to worry you wouldn't make it," she said as he joined them. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, awkwardly balancing his packages. James immediately noticed the parcels. "Are those presents?" he asked, eyes wide with childish hope. Virginia gently shushed him, but Finn smiled. "Some of them might be for a boy about your age. We'll have to wait and see." The evening passed in a blur of food, music, and conversation. The Thorntons had invited nearly everyone from the ranch and several neighboring families, creating a festive atmosphere that even Finn, with his aversion to crowds, found pleasant. Throughout it all, he remained aware of Virginia, her laugh when someone told a joke, the graceful way she moved through the room, how often her eyes sought his across the gathering. Later, as the party began to wind down, Finn found himself on the porch with Virginia. The children were inside, listening to Mrs. Thornton read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," leaving the adults a rare moment of privacy. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Virginia said, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape illuminated by a full moon. "I never imagined the frontier could hold such wonder." Finn looked at her profile, silvered by moonlight. "Neither did I," he said softly, not referring to the scenery. She turned to him then, her expression open and vulnerable in a way that made his chest ache. "Finn, she hesitated, then reached into a small pocket in her dress. "I have something for you. It's not much, but—" She pressed a small package into his hand, wrapped in a scrap of blue fabric tied with a simple string. Opening it carefully, Finn found a handkerchief embroidered with his initials in one corner. "You mentioned you lost yours," she explained, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "I know it's a simple thing, but—" "It's perfect," he interrupted, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't express. How long had it been since anyone had noticed such a small detail about him? How long since anyone had cared enough to remember? Summoning his courage, Finn reached into his coat and withdrew the velvet pouch. "I have something for you too." Virginia's eyes widened as she opened it and saw the silver pendant catching the moonlight. "Oh, Finn," she breathed. "It's beautiful, but it's too much. Please," he said quietly. "I want you to have it." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing despite all his efforts to remain detached. "Would you?" she asked, holding out the necklace. Finn took it with slightly trembling hands. Virginia turned, lifting her chestnut hair to allow him to place the pendant around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin as he fastened the clasp, and he felt her slight shiver at the contact. When she turned back to face him, the pendant resting just above the neckline of her dress, Finn was struck by an overwhelming certainty that his life had irrevocably changed the day Virginia Pierce's wagon had overturned in Whispering Pines. "Thank you," she said softly, her hand covering the heart. "Not just for this, but for everything these past months. I don't know what we would have done without you." The sincerity in her voice stripped away his last defenses. "Virginia, I—" Before he could finish, the door opened behind them, and Emma appeared, her solemn eyes taking in the scene before her. "Mama, Mrs. Thornton says it's time for the Christmas pudding." The moment broken, Virginia smiled at her daughter. "We'll be right there, sweetheart." As they returned to the warmth and light of the gathering, Finn found himself wondering what he would have said if they hadn't been interrupted. Whatever it was, he realized with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, it would have changed everything. January brought bitter cold and a revelation that shattered the fragile happiness Finn had begun to build. He was in town, collecting supplies, when he overheard a conversation that froze his blood. Says he's her late husband's brother, come to collect what's owed him, the postmaster was saying to the general store owner. Left a letter for the widow Pierce. Creditor, is he? Asked the storekeeper. Claims to be family, but seems more interested in money than kinship, if you ask me. Said if she can't pay, he'll take the land as settlement. It was purchased with family funds, apparently. Finn's hands tightened on the supplies he was holding. Virginia had mentioned creditors, but not a brother-in-law with claims to her property. The homestead she'd worked so hard to establish, the future she was building for her children, all of it threatened. Without conscious decision, he found himself at the post office, confronting the postmaster directly. This man who's looking for Mrs. Pierce, what's his name? Where is he staying? The postmaster, startled by Finn's intensity, stammered out a response. Fletcher Pierce. Said he'd be at the hotel until tomorrow. Finn didn't stop to consider the wisdom of his actions. Within minutes, he was pushing open the door of the town's only hotel, scanning the small lobby until he spotted a well-dressed man warming himself by the fire. Fletcher Pierce, Finn demanded. The man turned, revealing features that held a vague resemblance to Virginia's children, the same jawline as James, something of Emma's eyes. But where their faces held innocence and warmth, his expression was calculating, cold. Who's asking? He replied, taking in Finn's rancher attire with obvious disdain. Finn McAllister. I'm a friend of Virginia Pierce. Fletcher's mouth curved in what might have been a smile if it held any warmth. Ah, the local hero I've heard about. The cowboy who's been spending so much time with my brother's widow. The insinuation in his tone made Finn's jaw tighten. I understand you're making claims against her property. Not claims, Mr. McAllister. Facts. That land was purchased with Pierce family money. Money my brother borrowed from our father's estate with the promise of repayment. Since he died without fulfilling that obligation, the property reverts to the family. Virginia has children to support, Finn argued, struggling to keep his voice level. You would take their home? Fletcher shrugged, the gesture dismissive. Business is business. The children are welcome to return east with me, family obligation and all that. Though I suspect my sister-in-law might prefer other arrangements. His gaze raked over Finn with knowing contempt. Unless, of course, she can repay the debt in full by the end of the month. The sum he named matched what Virginia had told Finn, an impossible amount for a frontier widow to produce on such short notice. And if she can't pay? Finn asked, though he already knew the answer. Then I'll take possession of the property and everything on it. Fletcher's smile widened. Including those charming livestock you've been helping her acquire. The law is quite clear on the matter. Rage boiled in Finn's blood, but he knew a confrontation would only make things worse. Without another word, he turned and left, his mind racing with implications. Virginia would lose everything, not just property, but the independence she'd fought so hard to establish. The thought of her being forced to either return east in disgrace or, the alternative, that she might consider marriage as an escape from her financial troubles, sent a spike of something that felt dangerously like jealousy through his chest. There were several unmarried men in the territory who would gladly take a woman like Virginia as wife, property complications or not. By the time he reached the Pierce homestead, Finn had made a decision. He would offer her his savings, nearly everything he'd accumulated in 3 years of careful frugality. It wouldn't be enough, but perhaps with Thornton's help and whatever Virginia could gather, they might meet Fletcher's demands. He found her in the barn, checking on a newly born calf. Her face lit up when she saw him, then quickly sobered as she registered his expression. What's wrong? She asked immediately. Your brother-in-law is in town, Finn said, seeing no point in delaying the inevitable. He's come about the debt. The color drained from Virginia's face. Fletcher is here? In Whispering Pines. You knew he would come? Her eyes dropped, guilt flashing across her features. I received a letter last month. I hoped. She shook her head. I hoped I would find a solution before he arrived. Why didn't you tell me? The hurt in Finn's voice surprised even him. Virginia's gaze met his, a hint of defiance beneath her fear. Because I knew what you would do. You would offer to help, to give money you can't afford to lose, to fight battles that aren't yours. Aren't they? The question hung between them, laden with all the unspoken feelings that had grown over the months. Finn, I came west to stand on my own, to build something that belonged to me and my children alone. If I allow you to rescue me financially, I'm just exchanging one form of dependence for another. Her words stung, but Finn recognized the pride behind them. The same fierce independence that had drawn him to her from the beginning. This isn't about dependence, he argued. It's about not facing everything alone. Isn't that what you've been teaching me all these months? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Using my own words against me? If they're the right words. Virginia sighed, reaching out to stroke the calf's soft head. Even if I were willing to accept help, it wouldn't matter. Fletcher won't be satisfied with partial payment. He wants the land, has always wanted it, even when Charles was alive. This is just his excuse to take it. There has to be another way, Finn insisted. There is. Virginia straightened, a new resolve hardening her features. I'm going to contest his claim. The land was purchased after Charles died, with money I earned as a seamstress. Fletcher has no legal right to it. Can you prove that? I have documentation, letters, bank records. I didn't bring them with me because I never thought. She shook her head. They're still in Philadelphia, with my former neighbor. If I can get word to her, have the papers sent. That could take weeks, Finn pointed out. Fletcher said he's taking possession at the end of the month. Then I'll have to convince him to wait. Her voice was stronger now, the initial shock giving way to determination. Finn, I need to handle this my way. Please. He wanted to argue, to insist on riding into town and confronting Fletcher again, perhaps with his fists this time. But the set of Virginia's jaw told him she wouldn't welcome such interference, no matter how well-intended. At least let me go with you when you speak to him, he conceded. Virginia considered this, then nodded. Tomorrow morning. The children can stay with Mrs. Thornton for a few hours. As Finn rode back to the ranch that evening, his mind churned with worry. Something about Fletcher Pierce had struck him as dangerous, not in the straightforward way of frontier threats, but with the calculated menace of a man used to getting what he wanted regardless of the cost to others. For the first time in years, Finn found himself praying, not for his own safety or success, but for the protection of a woman and her children who had somehow become more important to him than his own carefully guarded solitude. The confrontation with Fletcher went exactly as Finn had feared. Virginia presented her case with quiet dignity, explaining the true source of the funds used to purchase the homestead. Fletcher listened with a smile that never reached his eyes, then dismissed her claims with a wave of his manicured hand. Charming story, Virginia, but without documentation, it's merely that, a story. The fact remains that you used the Pierce name to establish credit, and the Pierce family is now calling that debt due. I can get the documentation, Virginia insisted. I just need time. Time is a luxury you don't have. Fletcher's gaze flickered to Finn, who stood silently at Virginia's side. Unless, of course, you found alternative arrangements. The insinuation made Finn's hands curl into fists, but Virginia's slight touch on his arm kept him in check. 1 month, she negotiated. Give me 1 month to produce the papers proving the money was mine. Fletcher appeared to consider this. 2 weeks, he finally said. And as a sign of good faith, I'll require a partial payment now. Say, half the total sum. It was an impossible demand, designed to be rejected. Virginia's shoulders sagged slightly, the only visible sign of her distress. You know I don't have that kind of money, Fletcher. Then I suggest you start packing. He stood, signaling the end of the discussion. I'll be taking possession on the 15th. You and the children can remain until the end of the month. A generous concession, I think. Outside the hotel, Virginia stood motionless in the winter sunshine, her face pale but composed. Finn waited, giving her space to process what had happened. He never intended to negotiate, she finally said, her voice soft with realization. This was his plan all along. To take everything. Virginia, no. She cut him off, a new hardness in her tone. I won't let him win. I didn't survive everything else just to have Charles's brother steal my children's future. The determination in her voice should have reassured Finn, but something in her expression, a desperate calculation, set off warning bells in his mind. What are you planning? She wouldn't meet his eyes. I need to think. Would you mind taking me home? The children will be wondering where I am. During the ride back to the homestead, Virginia remained unusually quiet. Finn wanted to press her, to demand she share whatever plan was forming behind her troubled eyes. But he respected her enough to give her the silence she seemed to need. It was only as he was leaving, having seen her safely to her door, that she finally spoke what was on her mind. There's a man in the next county, Samuel Harrington. He's a widower with considerable property. He's asked to call on me twice since Christmas. The words hit Finn like a physical blow. You're considering marriage? To a man you barely know? Virginia's eyes, when they met his, held a mixture of resignation and defiance. A woman alone has few options on the frontier, Finn. Harrington could pay Fletcher's demands without blinking. The children would have security, a good home, but not love. Finn interrupted, the word emerging rough with emotion. Is that what you want for them? For yourself? What I want, Virginia said quietly, is to keep what I've built. If that means making a practical alliance rather than a romantic one, then so be it. There has to be another way, Finn insisted, echoing his words from the day before. Virginia, please don't do anything hasty. Give me time to what, Finn? Her voice cracked slightly. To offer marriage yourself, out of obligation or pity. I won't have that, not from you or anyone. The assumption staggered him. Was that what she thought? That his concern stemmed from pity rather than the deeper feelings that had been growing for months? Before he could correct her, Virginia continued, her composure returning. I appreciate everything you've done for us. More than I can say. But this is my problem to solve, my decision to make. With that, she turned and entered the house, closing the door gently but firmly behind her. Finn stood on the porch for a long moment, feeling as though something precious was slipping through his fingers like water. For 3 days, Finn respected Virginia's implied request for space. He threw himself into ranch work, taking on the most demanding tasks to exhaust his body and quiet his mind. But on the 4th day, unable to bear the separation any longer, he rode to the homestead, determined to make her understand that his feelings were neither pity nor obligation. He found the cabin empty, the children's toys put away, the stove cold. Panic seized him until he noticed the note tacked to the door, addressed simply, Finn. Virginia's handwriting, neat and precise, swam before his eyes as he read. I have gone to visit Mr. Harrington. He has kindly offered a solution to my difficulties, and I must consider it for my children's sake. Please understand that this is the only way I can see to preserve what I have built here. Your friendship has meant more to me than you will ever know. Virginia. Friendship. The word pierced him like a knife. Was that all she believed he felt? All she felt in return? Without conscious thought, Finn found himself mounting his horse, urging the animal into a gallop toward the Thornton Ranch house. Mrs. Thornton would know where Harrington lived. She knew everything about everyone within 50 miles. The information secured, Finn rode as if pursued by demons, pushing his mount to its limits across the winter landscape. Harrington's ranch lay some 20 miles distant, a sprawling property that spoke of wealth and established power. By the time Finn arrived, twilight was settling over the land, casting long shadows across the snow. A servant answered his knock, eyeing Finn's trail-worn appearance with suspicion. Mr. Harrington is entertaining guests, the man said stiffly. If you have ranch business, I need to speak with Mrs. Pierce, Finn interrupted. Virginia Pierce. It's urgent. Before the servant could respond, a familiar voice called from within. It's all right, Thomas. I'll speak with Mr. McAllister. Virginia appeared in the doorway, looking both surprised and resigned to see him. She wore a dress Finn hadn't seen before, dark blue velvet that must have been borrowed from Harrington's late wife's closet. The sight of her in another man's house, wearing clothes he had provided, sent a surge of something primal through Finn's veins. May we speak privately? He asked, his voice tighter than intended. With a glance back toward what must have been a parlor or dining room, Virginia nodded and stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. In the fading light, her face was pale but composed, her chestnut hair arranged more formally than he'd ever seen it. You shouldn't have come, she said softly. Were you going to tell me? Finn demanded. Or just send a wedding announcement? Virginia flinched at his tone. I haven't accepted his proposal yet. I needed time to consider. To consider marrying a man you don't love to solve a financial problem? The bitterness in his voice surprised even him. Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. What would you have me do, Finn? Watch Fletcher take everything? Return east in disgrace? Let my children grow up knowing their mother failed? I would have you trust me. The words burst from him with unexpected force. Trust that there are other solutions, that you don't have to sacrifice yourself. Trust you. Virginia stepped closer, her voice dropping to ensure they weren't overheard. Like my husband trusted me with the truth about our finances? Like my father trusted my mother before he gambled away everything and left her destitute. She shook her head. I learned long ago not to place my future in someone else's hands. I'm not your husband or your father, Finn argued. What, Finn? She challenged when he hesitated. What are you to me exactly? A neighbor? A friend? You've never once indicated you wanted anything more, despite. She stopped abruptly, color flooding her cheeks. Despite what? The unfinished sentence hung between them, laden with possibility. Finn took a step closer, close enough to see the rapid pulse at her throat, to smell the faint lavender scent that had become so achingly familiar. I'm a man who loves you, he said quietly, the words emerging with a certainty that surprised him. Who has loved you since you smiled at me from beside that overturned wagon? Who loves your children as if they were his own? Who can't imagine a future that doesn't include all of you in it? Virginia's eyes widened, a tremor passing through her slight frame. Finn, I know I don't have Harrington's money or land, he continued, needing to say everything now that the dam had broken. I can't solve your problems with a signature on a bank draft. But I swear to you, Virginia, if you'll trust me, if you'll give me a chance, I'll spend every day of my life making sure you and your children never have to face another threat alone. Tears welled in her eyes, catching the last light of day. Do you know what you're saying? What you're offering? Marriage, he said simply. A life together. Not out of obligation or practicality, but because I love you. Because the thought of you with someone else. He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. The possessive anguish in his voice said everything. Virginia reached up, her gloved hand trembling slightly as it touched his cheek. I never dared hope, she whispered. You seemed so determined to keep your distance, to remain uninvolved. Even when you helped us, there was always a line you wouldn't cross. I was afraid, Finn admitted. Afraid of caring too much, of losing you the way I've lost everyone else. The frontier isn't kind to attachments. No, she agreed softly. It isn't. But perhaps that's why they matter more here than anywhere else. For a moment, they stood suspended in possibility, her hand warm against his face, his heart thundering in his chest. Then, from inside the house, a man's voice called Virginia's name, breaking the spell. She stepped back, conflict clear in her expression. I should go. Virginia, please, I need to think, Finn. This changes everything, and She took a steadying breath. I need time. I promised Mr. Harrington an answer tomorrow. I owe him the courtesy of a proper response. The thought of her spending the night under Harrington's roof, considering his proposal alongside Finn's, was almost unbearable. But he forced himself to nod, to respect her request for space. Tomorrow then, he said. I'll come to your homestead at noon. Virginia hesitated, then nodded. Tomorrow at noon. She turned to go back inside, then paused, looking back at him with eyes that held both fear and hope. Finn, I never thanked you for Christmas gift properly. Her hand went to the silver heart that still hung around her neck, visible above the neckline of the borrowed dress. The sight of it there, against the unfamiliar fabric, eased something in Finn's chest. She hadn't removed it, even here in another man's house. You're wearing it, he said softly. Always, she replied, and then she was gone, the door closing quietly behind her. Finn stood for a long moment in the gathering darkness, his future hanging in the balance. Then he mounted his horse and turned toward Whispering Pines, a new determination hardening his resolve. He had waited too long already to claim what his heart had recognized months ago. One way or another, he would find a solution to Virginia's problems, one that didn't require her to sacrifice her happiness or her independence. Finn didn't sleep that night. Instead, he rode to town and spent hours in conversation with Thornton, the bank manager, and finally, as dawn broke, with the territorial judge who happened to be passing through. By mid-morning, he had a plan, not perfect, not guaranteed, but a fighting chance. As promised, He arrived at the Pierce homestead at noon, his heart hammering as he approached the small cabin. Virginia must have been watching for him, because she opened the door before he could knock. She looked tired, as if she too had passed a sleepless night, but there was a serenity in her expression that hadn't been there the day before. "The children are with Mrs. Thornton again," she said by way of greeting. "I thought we should talk privately." Finn nodded, following her inside. The cabin was warm and welcoming, with a fire crackling in the hearth and the familiar sense of home, bread, coffee, the lavender sachets Virginia kept in her linens. It struck him forcefully how much he had come to think of this place as home, more than the bunkhouse had ever been. Virginia gestured for him to sit at the small table, taking the chair opposite. Her hands, usually so steady, fidgeted with the edge of her simple calico dress, a far cry from the borrowed finery of the night before. "I spoke with Mr. Harrington this morning," she began, her voice carefully neutral. "I declined his proposal." Relief flooded through Finn, so intense he had to close his eyes briefly to master it. "I'm glad," he said simply when he could trust his voice. "Not because of what you said last night," Virginia continued, her gaze direct. "Or not entirely. I couldn't marry him because it would have been dishonest, to him, to myself, to my children. I realized I was contemplating trading my independence for security, and that's no basis for a marriage." "What about my proposal?" Finn asked, trying to keep the desperate hope from his voice. "Would that be trading independence for security too?" A small smile touched her lips. "No, Finn. That would be something else entirely." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "But before I can answer you, I need to know, truly know, that you understand what you're asking. Marriage means sharing burdens, sharing problems. It means no more keeping people at arm's length because you're afraid of losing them." "I know," he said softly. "I've spent my life believing that the frontier was no place for attachment, that caring for people just meant more pain when they were gone. But you showed me another truth, that we survive out here precisely because we have others to fight for, to build with." He turned his hand to catch her fingers in his. "I'm not afraid anymore, Virginia. Not of loving you. Not of being a father to your children. Not of building a future that might someday end in loss." Tears welled in her eyes. "I told myself I would never depend on anyone again after Charles died. That I had to be strong enough to stand alone. But that's not strength, is it? Just another kind of fear. So where does that leave us?" Finn asked, his heart suspended between hope and fear. Virginia's smile deepened, a tear spilling down her cheek. "It leaves us here, together, if you still want that. If you still want me, with all my pride and independence and 2 children who already adore you almost as much as I do." The words took a moment to register fully. "You love me?" Finn asked, needing to hear it clearly. "Of course I love you," Virginia said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "How could I not? You've shown me what it means to be truly cared for, not as a helpless woman to be rescued, but as a partner to be supported." Joy surged through Finn, bright and overwhelming. He stood, pulling Virginia to her feet and into his arms in one fluid movement. She came willingly, her body fitting against his as naturally as if they'd been embracing for years. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I love you and Emma and James. I want to be a husband to you and a father to them. I want to build our life right here, on this land." Virginia leaned back slightly to look up at him, her eyes suddenly sharpening with remembered reality. "Fletcher," she said, "even if we marry, he still has legal claim to the property. Unless I can prove the money was mine." "About that," Finn said, a smile breaking across his face. "I spent the night talking to some people in town. The territorial judge is willing to issue an injunction against Fletcher taking possession until your documentation arrives from Philadelphia. I sent a telegram this morning, and Thornton has agreed to offer us a loan against next year's crop, just in case." Virginia stared at him in wonder. "You did all that? For me?" "For us," he corrected. "This is what partnership looks like, Virginia. Not one person solving everything alone, but 2 people working together to face whatever comes." Her eyes filled with fresh tears, but her smile was radiant. "Ask me again," she whispered. "Properly this time." Understanding her meaning, Finn slowly lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands in his. "Virginia Pierce, I love you more than I ever believed possible. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of allowing me to be a father to your children, of building a life together here on this land that you've fought so hard to keep. Yes, she said immediately, her voice clear and certain. Yes, Finn McAllister. I will marry you. He rose and pulled her close again, his heart so full it seemed impossible his chest could contain it. This time, there was no hesitation as he lowered his head to hers, their lips meeting in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both breathless, Virginia rested her forehead against his chest. The children will be overjoyed, she murmured. James has been asking for weeks when you were going to live with us permanently. Finn laughed, the sound freer than he could ever remember it being. Smart boy. Emma too, though she's more subtle about it. She left a drawing on my bed last night, a picture of the four of us, standing in front of this cabin. She called it our family. The word, family, resonated in Finn's chest like a bell. Family. Something he'd been without for so long he'd convinced himself he didn't need it, couldn't have it, shouldn't want it. Yet here it was, offered freely by this remarkable woman and her children. When? He asked, suddenly impatient. When can we be married? Virginia laughed, the sound like music. The circuit preacher comes through next week. Would that be soon enough, Mr. McAllister? Barely, he growled, pulling her close again. And Fletcher? Her expression sobered slightly. He'll fight us, even with the injunction. He's not a man who loses gracefully. Let him fight, Finn said with quiet conviction. He'll find we're stronger together than he could ever imagine. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the windows like blessings. Inside, Finn held Virginia in his arms, marveling at how completely his life had transformed in the months since a widow's overturned wagon had crossed his path. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for so many years felt like a distant memory, replaced by a certainty that whatever the frontier might throw at them, they would face it together, husband and wife, father and mother, a family forged in the challenging crucible of the American West. Spring came early that year, bringing with it new beginnings. The documentation from Philadelphia arrived just in time, proving conclusively that Virginia had purchased the homestead with her own funds. Fletcher, faced with the territorial judge's ruling, retreated back east, his schemes thwarted by the very legal system he had tried to manipulate. On a perfect April morning, with wildflowers dotting the prairie and birdsong filling the air, Virginia Pierce became Virginia McAllister in a simple ceremony at the church in Whispering Pines. Emma served as her mother's maid of honor, solemn and proud in a new dress Finn had bought her for the occasion. James stood beside Finn, the carved wooden horse clutched in his small hand as he watched his mother marry the man who had already become his hero. Later, as the community celebrated with food and music on the grounds of what was now the McAllister homestead, Finn found a quiet moment with his new wife beneath the trees where he had once found her crying. Happy? He asked, his arm around her waist. Virginia leaned against him, her wedding band catching the spring sunlight. More than I ever dreamed possible, she answered honestly. And you? Any regrets about giving up your solitary ways? Finn looked across the yard, where Emma was teaching other girls a complicated skipping game, and James was proudly showing his friends the new calf in the barn. Then he looked down at his wife, her chestnut hair adorned with wildflowers, her eyes reflecting the same love he felt overflowing in his own heart. Only that I wasted so much time believing I was meant to be alone, he said, when all along, I was just waiting for you to find me. Virginia smiled and reached up to touch his face, now clean-shaven for their wedding day. We found each other, she corrected gently. And in finding each other, we both found home. As the celebration continued around them, Finn held his wife close, thinking of the journey that had brought them to this moment. A journey that had begun with a lonely cowboy convinced the frontier was no place for love, and a determined widow who had proven him wonderfully, irrevocably wrong. The homestead stretched before them, the land green with promise in the spring sunshine. They had planted the fields together, repaired the fences side by side, faced down threats with united strength. What had once been simply Virginia's bid for independence had transformed into something richer, a true home, built on love and partnership, strong enough to withstand whatever the frontier might bring. And as Finn McAllister looked out over the land he now shared with his family, he knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not just survival, but a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a family worth coming home to at the end of each day.